On the morning of September 9th, 2025, the skyline of Doha was pierced by a thunderous explosion. Israel confirmed it had carried out an airstrike in the heart of Qatar's capital, targeting a meeting of Hamas leaders who were reportedly gathered to discuss a ceasefire proposal. For many observers, this wasn't just another chapter in the long, bloody conflict between Israel and Hamas. This was different. The strike wasn't in Gaza. It wasn't in the West Bank. It wasn't even in Lebanon or Syria, where Israel has frequently acted against Hezbollah. This was Qatar, a wealthy Gulf monarchy, a US ally, and the home of one of the world's most important mediation channels. That left a burning question. Did Qatar knowingly allow Israel to conduct this operation on its soil? Or has Israel reached a point where it will strike wherever it pleases, regardless of sovereignty, alliances, or diplomatic consequences? To understand the magnitude of this moment, we need to revisit Qatar's unique role in the Middle East. For years, Qatar has been both a mediator and a host. The tiny Gulf state has housed Hamas's political bureau since the 2010s, offering leaders like Ismail Haniyeh and Khaled Mashal refuge in Doha. This wasn't just hospitality, it was strategy. Qatar positioned itself as a crucial middleman between Hamas, Israel, and Western powers, often serving as the bridge for ceasefire talks during Gaza's repeated wars. While other Arab capitals distanced themselves from Hamas under pressure from the US or Saudi Arabia, Doha leaned into the role. It presented itself as a necessary broker, arguing that without Hamas at the table, no peace deal could be reached. In 2025, this role became even more critical. The Gaza war had stretched into its 11th month. Israeli bombardments had left tens of thousands dead. Hamas continued to launch rockets, and a hostage crisis remained unresolved. The US, alongside Egypt and Qatar, was pushing hard for a new ceasefire arrangement. By early September, Hamas leaders were in Doha to deliberate on whether to accept the latest proposal. And then came the strike. At approximately 9:15 a.m. on September 9th, explosions rocked the Lake neighborhood of Doha. Witnesses reported hearing the sound of jets overhead, followed by two sharp blasts. Videos circulating online showed plumes of smoke rising over a residential district not far from diplomatic zones. Israel quickly claimed responsibility. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that the strike targeted terrorist masterminds plotting further atrocities. According to Israeli sources, the operation was aimed at eliminating senior Hamas leaders who had blood on their hands from October 2023 onwards. Casualty reports confirmed 6 dead, 5 Hamas officials and 1 Qatari security officer assigned to the compound. Several others were injured, but the intended high-profile Hamas figures, reportedly including Ismail Haniyeh, survived. Qatari authorities immediately sealed off the area, with emergency vehicles rushing to the site. Within hours, the Qatari Foreign Ministry issued a blistering statement condemning the strike as a cowardly violation of Qatar's sovereignty and a grave breach of international law. But the damage had been done, not just to buildings, but to Qatar's credibility as a neutral mediator. Now the story becomes murky. Doha insists it had no prior knowledge of the strike. Officials claim they were blindsided, receiving word only once the explosions had already occurred. They describe Israel's actions as aggression and insist that Qatar never consented to its airspace or territory being used for such an operation. Netanyahu's government, by contrast, framed the strike as part of a broader doctrine. Hamas leaders are legitimate targets wherever they are. Israel stopped short of confirming whether it had informed allies in advance, but Netanyahu warned other countries directly, saying, "If you host Hamas, you host death." They are not safe anywhere, reports surfaced, suggesting that Washington may have been informed, at least partially, before the strike. Some US officials claimed Qatar received advance notice, while Doha flatly denied it. The ambiguity has fueled suspicion. Was Qatar complicit or simply sidelined? Hamas leaders, for their part, portrayed the attack as a failed assassination attempt. "The cowardly enemy struck but failed to break us," one official said. They confirmed the loss of members, but stressed that their senior leadership survived. This clash of narratives, Qatar denying, Israel justifying, the US staying vague, set the stage for conspiracy theories and diplomatic fallout. Here's where the story enters controversial territory. Some analysts speculate that Qatar, under mounting pressure from the US and other allies, may have quietly allowed Israel to strike Hamas on its soil. By doing so, Qatar could claim innocence publicly while subtly signalling a shift away from openly protecting Hamas. Another view is that Israel acted unilaterally, without coordinating, proving that it no longer respects even the sovereignty of US allies. If true, this would mark a dangerous escalation, showing Israel willing to extend its military reach to any state hosting its enemies. Others suggest the operation wasn't about killing Hamas leadership outright, but about sending a chilling message: nowhere is safe. By striking while Hamas was deliberating on a ceasefire deal, Israel may have hoped to sabotage negotiations or force Hamas to compromise under fear. The murkiest theory of all, that Washington green-lighted the strike, knowing it would undermine Hamas but weaken Qatar diplomatically. Some critics argue this could explain why Qatar's condemnation sounded more defensive than aggressive. The international response was swift. At an emergency summit in Doha days later, Arab leaders denounced Israel's attack as a declaration of war on Arab sovereignty. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Iran voiced solidarity with Qatar, though divisions quickly emerged on how far to respond. On the other hand, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights condemned the attack, warning it risked destabilizing the entire Gulf region. While European states criticized the violation of sovereignty, their language was more cautious. Washington reiterated its support for Israel's right to defend itself, but avoided directly commenting on whether it approved of the Qatar strike. The Gulf Cooperation Council vowed to activate joint defense mechanisms, but in practice stopped short of announcing concrete military action. The summit ended with fiery words but little collective action, highlighting just how isolated Qatar felt, even among its neighbours. The implications of this strike stretch far beyond a single explosion in Doha. They ripple across diplomacy, law, security, and the balance of power in the Middle East. The most immediate fallout is on the peace process itself. Hamas leaders were in Qatar to discuss a US-backed ceasefire framework. By striking them mid-deliberation, Israel effectively shattered any sense of good faith. Hamas officials quickly declared that negotiations were dead, accusing Israel of negotiating with one hand while dropping bombs with the other. For many, this raises a troubling question. Did Israel deliberately sabotage peace talks to maintain military pressure rather than pursue compromise? For Qatar, the strike was a humiliation. As a host nation and mediator, Doha prides itself on being a neutral ground. That image has now been punctured. Critics ask, how can Hamas or any group trust Qatar as a safe negotiating venue if Israel can strike there with impunity? Qatar faces pressure to prove it can secure its territory. If it fails, its role as a mediator could erode. From Israel's perspective, the operation signals a bold new doctrine, that borders will not stop it from pursuing Hamas. For decades, Israel has acted in Lebanon and Syria, occasionally Sudan, but striking inside a Gulf monarchy is a dramatic escalation. It sets a precedent that no location, no matter how wealthy, allied, or distant, can shield those Israel deems terrorists. This brings us to the Gulf itself. If Israel can strike in Qatar today, could it target Hamas-linked actors in Turkey tomorrow, or Hezbollah figures in Iraq? Such actions risk pushing US-aligned states into a defensive posture, questioning Washington's guarantees of protection. Already, Turkey has raised alarms, warning that it could be next if Israel's extraterritorial campaign expands. From a legal standpoint, Israel's operation is deeply controversial. Article 2.4 of the UN Charter prohibits the use of force against another state's territorial integrity. Qatar has signalled it may pursue international legal action, possibly at the International Court of Justice, but such cases are slow and often symbolic. The larger issue is whether international law has the teeth to restrain states acting on their own perceived security imperatives. As the dust settles, we're left with two narratives. On one hand, Israel argues it struck a legitimate target, Hamas leaders responsible for atrocities, hiding comfortably in Doha. From this perspective, Israel is not out of control. It is simply refusing to let borders protect its enemies. On the other hand, Qatar and much of the world see this as an unprecedented violation. A sovereign Gulf state, long considered a US ally, was bombed without consent. If this becomes the new normal, then sovereignty itself is at stake. These are some unanswered questions. Did Qatar truly have no forewarning? Or was there quiet coordination under US pressure? Was Israel's main objective to kill Hamas leaders, or to send a message and disrupt ceasefire talks? Will the US distance itself from the operation, or was Washington more complicit than it admits? What to watch in coming weeks? Will it pursue legal action at the UN or ICC? Will it demand stronger GCC military coordination? Will Hamas retaliate or use the strike to harden its negotiating position? Will Israel strike again in another state? If it does, we may see a cascade of diplomatic crises across the region. Will Gulf monarchies still trust Washington's security umbrella if American allies can be bombed without defense? This is more than a single strike. It is a test of international order. If a small but powerful state like Qatar can be violated, what does that mean for global norms? And so we come back to the central question: did Qatar let Israel strike Hamas, or is Israel simply out of control? Was this tacit consent a betrayal of Hamas under pressure from Washington, or was it a humiliating breach of sovereignty that Doha could not prevent? Tell us what you think in the comments. Do you believe Qatar played a double game, or was Israel setting a dangerous precedent for unchecked extraterritorial strikes? This story is still unfolding, and we'll continue to track developments from diplomatic meetings to possible legal action. Make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for updates, because this conflict has just entered a new, unprecedented phase.